morning and welcome to our webinar session focusing on mental health. Today's session is an extension of our wellness offering to create a platform for our staff to participate in important topics such as mental health. The key focus and elements of today's session is to identify stresses and awareness around mental health, to provide tools to manage our mental health, especially during this period where we are all faced with the COVID-19 pandemic. We also aim to provide some contact details and information where to seek assistance should we require it. Our host for today is Mr. Gasant Abarder, who is the Manager of Communications, Branding and Marketing in our Institutional Advancement Department. Our panel here today, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to you sharing your knowledge, expertise and experiences relative to mental health. Our viewers and staff, we are grateful for you tuning us and participating in this session today. Gasant, I will now hand over to you to deal with the logistics of the session as well as introducing our panel formally to the audience. Thank you very much.
So welcome to my colleagues at UWC. I miss you guys. We haven't seen each other since at least March, I think. I think everybody's 105 days at UWC is probably something in the region of 115. And in our own way, we've tried to cope with lockdown. We're in uncharted waters. And on that note, I'd like to introduce to you a very illustrious panel that will help us to look at the issue of mental health, self-management and support. What can you do at home to make sure that while you're not just running over to the fridge to exercise your biceps and your tummy, you're also exercising your mind and keeping mentally fit, you know? Because at the same time, we're juggling school commitments for our kids, we're running households, we're on Zoom meetings all the time. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ramneek Ahluwalia. I'm hoping, Doctor, that I'm pronouncing it correctly. We're very privileged to have him with us. He's the CEO of Higher Health, and he's a seasoned medical doctor with postgraduate training in internal medicine, and is a registered medical practitioner in Mauritius and South Africa and India. We also have with us Dr. Colinda Linde, who's a board member of the South African Anxiety and Depression Group and a former chairperson as well. And her area of expertise is cognitive behavioural therapy for managing sleep, stress and anxiety. She's also a clinical psychologist, and we really thank you for joining our panel, Doctor. I've got the permission to use their first names today, just in case any of our colleagues were wondering. And then Ms. Shamiema McLeod deals with a topic that I'm very, very fascinated with, and that's emotional intelligence. She's a businesswoman, a strategist, and a facilitator who has successfully opened markets in facilitation, in change and organisational development in South Africa, India, the US, and the UK. Our final panelist is homegrown, Professor Rashid Ahmed. Rashid works at UWC as an associate professor in the psychology department, and he's a registered clinical psychologist. His interests are in the context of healthcare and community resilience. So resilience is something that the UWC community is very, very au fait with. You know, if there's nothing else, we're a resilient community. I want to start off though with Colinda. Colinda, sometimes we wake up in the morning and we don't feel like getting out of bed. We either feel, oh gosh, how am I going to face this day? I've got 3 or 4 meetings lined up. What is that feeling that we're feeling, and is it normal?
Right, so thank you again for inviting me. I think this is an absolutely wonderful initiative, because without the staff, where are we going to be? So I've got a couple of slides, and maybe Jessie can put those up, but I'm going to give you guys a bit of a context. So, you know, I think, when is it depression? When is it just a blue day? So let me give a context. I'm going to just touch on anxiety, depression, mood, and also situational anxiety. Is it COVID anxiety? And then I can either touch on stigma now or a little bit later. You could just let me know.
Sure.
So I'd like to start with a few mental health facts. And, you know, again, there are many, many stats and studies around, but this was sort of a high level, and it really made me think. So if you think about depression, you know, when I qualified some time ago, 2020 seemed a long time in the future, and there were all these studies being done where they said that depression would be the biggest problem, would be the leading cause of disability by 2020. Well, here we sit. So 20 to 25% lifetime prevalence. So that's quite a lot of people, you know, that's a fifth to 25, a quarter of people. I think with men, the number is lower, but I think that maybe it's a little bit to do with, you know, guys must be strong and mustn't report. But that's a lot of people right now who are trying to get through their day with a clinical depression.
Can I just pause you there, Colinda, and ask you, what kind of a catalyst has COVID-19 and the lockdown been in terms of those kind of projections for 2020? So all of a sudden, we've got the silent, indiscriminate virus that's terrorizing us. We've had to change the way we act, the way we engage with people, how we go to the shop, our own health and safety precautions. So how is that impacted on the likelihood of you developing a symptom of depression or anxiety?
Right. Well, you know, depression, if we look at some of the main theories, Seligman came up with this theory, I'm sure Rashid knows this one, about learned helplessness. And if you think about it, the whole world is kind of trapped in a way, you know. We're all feeling helpless. We've never encountered this thing before. It's completely beyond our experience. And we have the lockdown factor. We have the economic factor. You know, I'm seeing so many students who are all bright-eyed. We're going to start our career, and now they're at home. So I think everybody's feeling quite helpless at the moment. So these numbers, I don't know what the numbers are going to be when we next do, you know, when we come up with the next stats. But this is depression before COVID. These are the statistics. I'd say easily it's doubled. And there was a study recently done by SADAG. I haven't got the numbers here, but SADAG's calls have increased, I think it was fourfold since March, and it's just going up all the time. So definitely, I think everybody's got some kind of despair. You know, we talked a lot about the grieving, and I've talked, you know, the last few months about that everybody's grieving. It's the loss of the world as we knew it. And yeah, I think that there are a lot of people who are just feeling hopeless, helpless, kind of stuck. So depression definitely is on the up. And of course, the other best friend of depression is anxiety. So pre-COVID, you can see there's 3 to 8% of people at any given time have got a clinical anxiety, generalized anxiety. And that has definitely gone up as well. Because, you know, there's uncertainty all over the place. Nobody can predict what's going to happen. All our anchors that we normally use have disappeared. So definitely anxiety and depression, I think we've all got it. And I haven't got it on there, but, you know, OCD, everybody's obsessively cleaning, checking, washing. So a lot of my clients who do have depression and anxiety have said to me, well, welcome to my world, because now the whole world feels like I feel.
I just want to pause there and go to Rashid. Rashid, do you think our lifestyles, even before lockdown, has, you know, the treadmills, the pace of the treadmill has become faster? So we're having to deal with disruption all the time. We're talking about social media. Everybody sitting around the dinner table with a smartphone in their hands, checking their WhatsApp statuses or Twitter or Facebook. And does that add to our anxiety? The inability to switch off. And now we're being asked to concentrate in an environment that is very charged, you know, and it forces us to sit down and to reimagine our day-to-day lives. I think Rashid's microphone's been muted, eh? Can we ask to unmute it?
Okay.
Okay.
I think it's a feat for me just to be online, and you can see my level of computer literacy, right? It's a difficult question, and I think it's something I will speak about later. But and I think while the challenge of COVID-19 is unprecedented, I think the fault lines or the challenges in society that you're referring to were there even before COVID-19. So COVID-19 has exacerbated it. So I think people were struggling in many areas even before COVID-19. And so when we speak about mental health in the context of mental health, I think that's what we must also consider. Is it COVID itself that is presenting so much of a challenge, or the kind of things that you were referring to, the kind of changes that have occurred over the last few decades, which add to, just coping with our daily life? I don't have that answer.
Yeah, it does in a manner, and it takes me to my next point, right? How I want to ask Shamiema McLeod about emotional intelligence, and it works both ways. So I've spoken, Shamiema, and if we can unmute Shamiema for a second there, I've spoken to friends and colleagues about their anxiety, that they always feel like their boss is looking over their shoulder. When they say they're working, they feel like they're being watched all the time. They're working through their lunch hour. As a caring society, and UWC is known as a caring community, we have a duty of care not only to our colleagues and our staff and our students, but also the communities we find ourselves in. And as you know, next week's Mandela Day. Usually we would be out and about engaging with the community in the service of others. What kind of approach should, first of all, the staff member have, and what kind of approach should the manager approach? Should we be more compassionate? I don't want to lead you into the answer, but can you shed some light on that emotional approach to the work environment?
I think in any context that we're working in, there will be challenges. There'll be challenges between colleagues. There'll be challenges with workload. There'll be challenges with management styles. We're individuals. We all have different ways of working. We have different styles of leading. We have different ways of coping. And I think the first step in those different contexts is to really understand who am I, what's my preference, and to move forward into a way that is also having an understanding of how others are managing me and how others are leading me. And when we have some intelligence about that, when we have some awareness about that, I think it's going to be much easier for us to navigate those challenges that come our way. I'll give you a basic example. If I have a manager that's managing me that's very nitpicky or kind of like micromanaging everything that I'm doing along the way, that might be a trigger for me, and I might be frustrated or angry. It's just something that I don't like. If I have some information about that particular personality or that particular manager that's managing me, I'm going to be less triggered by that, because it is something that I can expect. And also, if I have that information, I can think about that particular personality and formulate some strategies that support both me and the manager. Is there a way that I can do some upward management? Is there a way that I can communicate with this person that just makes that relationship easier for both of us? And that's the beauty of implementing some of these emotional intelligence strategies, is so that we can have an easier ride.
Now we're gonna look at some of the steps that you're gonna share with us later, and some coping mechanisms, you know, and how to unleash your emotional intelligence, for lack of a better word. I just want to remind all our colleagues who've tuned in, and I think there's well over 100 staff members who have joined the conversation, which I love. That's really cool. I want to remind them that we won't allow questions through the platform, but you can pose a question in the chat. If it's relevant, we'll pose it to one of the panelists, but we'll also share some resources and some takeaway points for you. Remember, the session is being recorded, so you'll have an opportunity later to play it back and to share it with other people. I want to ask Dr. Ramneek for a second, just from a higher health perspective and from a kind of a sectoral approach. The way we're working at the moment, Dr. Ramneek, we've been forced to work from home with using technology and using devices. And within technology, we are in danger of also sometimes losing our humanness, not our humanity, but our kind of approach to other people. Some people get triggered by an email. They might misread completely the tone of an email or the intention of an email, and they'll feel triggered because they feel like their manager or supervisor is coming down hard on them. So Dr. Ramneek, what are some of the pitfalls of, we're pushing for blended learning, online and blended learning, but within that, there are also things we need to watch out for. And what has been your experience with some of the 27 universities across the higher education landscape been like?
You know, thank you, Gasant, and also good morning to everyone, and such an honor to be part of University of Western Cape, which is one of a very intellectual, very important university in Western Cape. From the sectoral perspective, the first thing I'd like to tell you is that United Nations Secretary General and the World Health Organization has already alarmed all its member countries, which South Africa is part of, that of this co-epidemic called mental health and its absolute rise during the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we are currently is experiencing is what exactly the alert was. And I think it's very evident from how the COVID-19 has last 6 months taken over our lives. And since our lockdowns, we're probably about 104 days today. Now you could clearly see how it's impacting on every South African, whether you're in the tertiary system or you're outside in the tertiary system, it's impacting us. Now, in the PSET system, we've got 5 subsectors. We've got university subsector, which is 26 universities, can do remote learning possibility. Many universities do, but we've got universities like Walter Sisulu, University of Zululand, Wenda universities, deep rural universities. In fact, University of Western Cape, where students come from one of the most historically disadvantaged backgrounds. CPUT, UWC historically have students from Cape Flats, students from one of the most disprivileged settings around. Now, not everywhere possible is to provide remote learning. And that's a practical reality. We've got another subsector called TVET system, which is TVET colleges. We've got 300 sites across this country. Kailicha, in Zwelicha, in Umlazi, all the townships in South Africa, all the rural South Africa, and catering for one of the most disprivileged young South Africans across this country. And I'm going to come to the staff because it impacts equally on the staff as much as it impacts on a young life across. We've got 1,800 community education centers across South Africa in the same PSET system. And similarly, private higher education institutions where 20% of our population comes, and of course, work-based learning. So that's how big the PSET system is. Universities predominantly can try and attempt towards remote learning, but it has its own side effects along with it. Now, you are absolutely right. What we are seeing is insecurities in the minds of students at this stage, whether they will finish their academic year. Some people are relying on bursaries all their life to say, well, they will finish this and maybe they will find a job. And there is an absolute insecurities about job when it comes to COVID-19 at this stage. And that's the reality of what the world is going through. So there's a fear of finishing academic year, a fear of whether there will be job insecurities, which are absolutely true. For the staff, is the same component, and that applies to universities in general, which will be how will they embrace a curriculum that is designed for a 365 days calendar has to be now shortened or extended. And there is an absolute insecurity whether there will be a possibility of being able to leave no student behind and still be able to communicate the same curriculum to everyone in an equal way.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and then there is another reality, Gasant, will be is the reality of staff insecurity in jobs also, because there will be a stage which will be coming both from administrative staff, support staff, and this. And these are the fears of unknown that are revolving around a human brain at every level of the PSET system, from a vice chancellor, management, down to an academic staff, a support staff, a security staff who has to screen with the fear that I'm the most exposed to the epidemic at this moment, to a young life who's actually unsure of what is happening and how will a university provide that kind of support with all the dilemmas of information moving around their minds. So it's a very difficult situation. So which means we have to be absolutely ready with a comprehensive mental health program, which I'll speak to you later, which we as PSET system designed, which the ministers kind of revealed around how we have to approach this as a very important major pandemic. But my initial remarks will be that the sector will face, and this is inevitable, this pandemic is about to stay with us for a couple of years and even more. And if that's the reality, we need to now learn to live with it and kind of remove the fears through education, through information, exactly what you're doing to talk to your employees, so that everybody comes on the same page and is able to handle both the pandemic and the associated pandemics, like the mental health and many more that will revolve around it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for those insights. It's so very eloquently put. I think I want to go back to Colinda. We've got a few questions from the floor, let's call it that. The question is, when working from home, hours are flexible, but this now leaves us with obligations that are self-imposed to working at night because during the day the emails are quiet. How do you self-manage that? And maybe it's something that Shamiema McLeod can touch on as well. And then
okay.
I want to.
Well, shall I answer that first?
No. I also want to just preface that question with. I also want to talk. I wanted to touch a little bit about stigma, because especially the guys, you mentioned it earlier on. Cowboys don't cry, you know. And then there's two categories of students and staff. Some of them are being brought back to campus in a number of 33% of the entire university community. And there's real fear, as Dr. Ramneek pointed out. Are they going to be safe when they come to campus, even though there is still the online learning? And for those staff working from home, there is the fear of isolation. You know, am I surplus to needs now that my email box isn't exploding, you know? So I know it's a mouthful there, but can you touch on those three issues for me, please?
Yes, of course, definitely. So first of all, the working from home, and there are a few tips, and you know, I belong to different psychology panels, shall we say, or groups, and the one thing that's been pervasive all along has been that we are very bad at transitions. So there are very few people who have an absolute setup, you know, with their tech and their room and the whole thing. I mean, I myself, of course, if I'm consulting, I can't be anywhere in my house besides where it's very private. So that there's a section of my bedroom that I've had to convert. So that the first word that's important is transitions. So when you are going to work, get your things set up, but when you've finished, close it up, put it away, especially if it's in a living or a sleeping space. So we're very bad at that, because, you know, if you say in your room, your lounge, your bedroom, wherever it is, and you've got all your stuff, it's kind of easy just to slide into work, check the mails, quickly answer something. So the first of those is transitions. The next one, I'm going to call division of labor. So I've had this come up many times over the last 3 months, where say there's one person who's still working, and maybe others can't work at the moment, or some have lost their jobs. And so the person who's working starts to feel resentful, because now I'm sitting over here doing work and I can hear you outside playing with the kids, or, you know, watching TV, and I'm kind of sitting here working, and I'm still doing the job that I normally do, you know, say cooking or cleaning or washing. And so this has led to shifts and open conversations, you know, that this is what I'm contributing, and these other things need to be done as well. How can all of us who share this space, because, you know, there are all sorts of new configurations of people living together, how can we do this? So that's the second one. So first the transitions, and then the division of labor, I'll call it. The third one is to do with routines. So, you know, I think that there are these memes going all over the place where people are sitting in their pajamas below the waist and, you know, that sort of thing.
I promise I'm not doing that.
Me neither. But, you know, from time to time, I have my dogs lying down here at the heater, and then they start barking. So, you know, yes, so we need to be quite particular with routines. We might be a little bit more relaxed with them, but there needs to be a routine. And attached to that is what I like to call work, rest, play. So, you know, I've often thought about work-life balance, that how come work gets its own category, and then life is all that other stuff that is just, you know, in its that category. So I often advise people to schedule in your day, work, rest, play, you know, blocks of these, because otherwise it's just work.
Colinda, the question talks about answering emails at night. So
yes.
Should you be mimicking your work day that you had in the office? Because in the office, if you're an admin person, you're expected to be on the clock from 20 past 8, and I'm hoping I'm getting this right because HR is in the room as well. 20 past 8, 20 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. That's our work day. And should you try and discipline, because during that day you're having coffee, you're taking breaks regularly. If you're a smoker, you're going outside to have a smoke for 10 minutes. You're coming back, there's a lunch hour, there's engagement with colleagues. We're fortunate also to be in a university space where we've got admin people, we've got creative people, we've got academics. So some of us have flexible arrangements with the university, which the university encourages. But now in a lockdown environment, when you're looking after the kids and you've got chores to do and you've got some of the workload as well and the responsibility, should you try as much as possible to mimic your workday, given the fact that you still have a school drop to do? You have to help with homeschooling. How do you manage that kind of thing? And I'm gonna come to Shamiema after this as well to help us unpack that.
Okay, so I would say it's a new normal. You know, we're all starting to talk about that. But at the moment, there's also a bit of COVID fatigue. So I think that routine is going to shift. So as long as you can just keep in your mind those chunks, work, rest, play. So schedule that accordingly. So say if you have to pop out and fetch kids or, you know, something like that, that's a bit different, then maybe your work is going to be broken up a bit differently. But, you know, if you've got a routine of sorts, it just gives you some comfort. So it doesn't have to be exactly like it was, where there were natural breaks and transitions. We have to now think for ourselves, okay, I'm now the boss of my time. We actually are. We think we're not. And we're the boss. So we have horrible bosses, because my boss makes me do emails at 10 at night. She's horrible. What a tyrant. So we have to start thinking like that. We have to own it. And later on, I'm going to talk about owning our mental health as well, that we have to actually schedule our day in a rational way. And later on, I'll also, if I get a moment, mention when we're working, we need to be working, because typically when we're working, we're thinking of rest and play. And when we're playing, we're thinking, oh, I've got to do this work. So try and be present in whichever chunk it is that you're working on. So
I want to touch on two things, right? And I know that if I switch off all my screens, including smartphone, TV screen, laptop, an hour before I go to sleep, I have a more restful sleep, a deeper sleep, because I feel like I've switched off, right? But I want to come back to the kind of bully boss. And I want to ask Shamiema about that. But before I get that, and managing upwards, but before I get there, quickly, can you touch on stigma? Because I know the gentleman in the room, this is a particular thing. I mentioned the cowboys don't cry phenomenon. How do you deal with stigma and telling yourself it's okay to feel this way, it's okay to feel vulnerable, it's okay to feel anxious?
You know, stigma, you can look at it broadly in terms of social stigma, which is where, you know, the group sees an observable difference in somebody else and then decides to discriminate, and they're worse, bad, etc. So that's the stigma that we've seen quite a lot of. But there's something else which is called self-stigma. And this is what we've got to watch out as well. That if you say are going through a depressive period or a very acute anxiety period, you know, society's taught us that mental illness, and that just sounds awful to say, is different than any other. You know, nobody says to a diabetic, well, why are you injecting yourself every day? Or somebody on, you know, chronic medication, why are you drugging every day? But when it comes to mental illness, it feels, you know, society tends to think, well, you kind of brought that on and just snap out of it. So we can't change broader society in this second right now, but we do need to start by owning it with ourselves. So stigma affects whether you tell or whether you don't tell, whether you reach out for help, whether you admit. You know, think about the AA. You've always got to be, I'm so-and-so and I have a problem with whatever. So, you know, I'm so-and-so and I'm going through a depressive episode. It's got to start there. And that's why these kind of forums are so important. So self-stigma, very dangerous, a very subtle one. And of course, if you've got that going on, are you going to reach out? Are you going to tell anybody else I'm not coping? And you're probably not. And I think it is worse for men than women. And hopefully that's starting to shift.
Shamiema, managing upwards. So the boss who insists, I hate that word boss, the manager who insists that they want an email answered at 10 a.m. From my experience at UWC, that doesn't happen. We've got very compassionate and caring people who work here. But it does happen to some of our family members, you know, and some of my friends have complained that they're working longer hours now, in fact, from home. So how do you manage that situation where you feel compelled to be working at 10 p.m. like Colinda mentioned? And how do you start speaking to your manager so that they understand that your circumstances have changed and the way the work day is set up is completely different to the norm?
So there's a couple of pieces on that. The one is to start off with, again, self-awareness. So this is going to sound really odd, but many of us don't actually, we're not very aware of our working styles and what works best for us. And so it is about sitting down and creating a plan and being conscious about what's the style that I like and how am I being managed, okay? So there's some people who get emails at 10 o'clock at night and they're fine with it. It's no big deal. I've got an email, I'll respond, no problem. And, you know, Dr. Linde mentioned this word resentment. It's really important for you to be able to recognize in the moment, is this email that I'm looking at now at 10 o'clock at night creating some resentment in me? And if it is, then it needs to be addressed, okay? And the first step with that is, what are the meanings that we're making up about our manager who sends us an email at 10 o'clock at night? Does it mean that she is disrespecting me? Does it mean that she doesn't value my time? Does it mean that I'm actually supposed to be on the clock 24 hours a day? Or does it mean that, you know, she's sending it, but she's actually just expecting it tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock? It's fine.
Some people are saying in the chat that some of us work better at night because the house is quiet.
Some of us work better at night. Exactly. Exactly.
I can attest to that because
Yeah.
I've got a 2-year-old daughter, a dog, and 2 cats who demand my attention during the day.
Right, right. So it's about, you know, we've heard this saying, communication is key. If it's creating some resentment in you, is to then approach your manager and say, you know, I got this at 10 o'clock last night. Let me check something with you. Did you expect me to respond in that moment? Or
you know,
for me to...
A phone call can be very disarming. So instead of replying on the email, why don't you call your manager instead of having a sleepless night? Don't die wondering. Pick up the phone, call your manager and say, listen, did you expect me to answer this now? Or is it something we can talk about tomorrow morning? And I think in that lies the potential answer, that we try and project whatever we're filtering inside and our prejudices onto what we're receiving as information, you know? So I always tell my colleagues and the people I manage, email is a very dangerous platform. If you're spending more than 2 minutes replying to an email, you're in trouble. Email should be there to confirm things, pick up the phone, have a conversation with another human being, or even better, have one of these virtual discussions where you can see the person, you can see the body language, you can see the demeanor. Is that advisable, Shamiema?
Again, communication is key. If you phone your manager at 10 o'clock at night and she answers the phone and it's really just to check whether, you know, she's expecting a response in that moment, that might create some resentment in her. Yeah. Again, it's very important to use some emotional intelligence with this. Perhaps send a WhatsApp or an SMS, and if she doesn't respond, hey, maybe it wasn't urgent, and maybe she's gone to bed and calling it a night, and hoping to see something tomorrow. So communication. How can we make this work? What are your expectations? Let me understand. Can I talk about what my limitations are, what my challenges are, and how can we work together in partnership rather than kind of like a hierarchical structure, which in many situations doesn't really work. This tell, do, you know, I'm telling you to do it now, you just do it. It does, again, it builds resentment in others.
And there's a very important...
Best out of your staff, go for partnership.
So Shamiema, just to touch on one other thing, you mentioned there that self-management is quite important as well. So in your work, you know what's urgent and what's not urgent, what can wait until tomorrow. Does this really need a response right now? You know, if it's like, okay, half an hour ago, this happened and we need to respond to it right now. Obviously, it's going to require a different approach to it. But people are asking about the workload of moms and women in particular, because as you know, we come from a very patriarchal society where the men are meant to be, or the males are meant to be the hunter-gatherers in a conventional kind of sense, in a conforming sense, and the women are the homekeepers, and that brings another set of stress to this ecosystem, because now both husband and wife or spouses are working, and I'm trying to keep this as gender fluid as possible as well. And most of the time, women are expected to have another 8 hours of caring for the family, putting the kids to bed, washing the kids, making dinner, washing up the dishes, the laundry, and that can lead to resentment too, can't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's tough out there. We have grown up in a patriarchal society. I mean, if I think about the culture where I come from, the men do the work and the women work and do the list that you've just talked about. And I think, again, the piece about communication, really just creating a partnership that divides these loads rather than just always assuming I have to do this in order for this relationship to survive, either this work relationship or this marriage or this family. So we, as women, sometimes we become automatic in our behaviors because we believe, well, that's how, you know, society expects me to be. And I think it's particularly harder for women who are wanting to work, but also are wanting to have a family. And then you get this superwoman syndrome that exists. And sometimes we create that for ourselves. And again, it really is about talking and communicating and finding some solutions that work. But again, awareness, you need to know that this is creating some resentment in me, so I need to do something about it.
So I'm from the male species, in case you were wondering, and just some advice to my male colleagues at UWC. I find that after a day of work, getting involved in some menial chores in the house and cooking and washing the dishes is a fantastic way of switching off. You can have your favorite CD playing in the background or your favorite TV show, and it really does help you to switch off, you know. And also, it's that time of the day where you can reconnect with your spouse or your children and just have a conversation about how their day was, you know, and listen to them. There's a question about KPAs, key performance areas. How does that shift from a conventional workplace to the new normal? I'm going to leave that question for our human resources people to answer. But I think, Rashid, from your perspective, that's a very important question, because I think a lot of people are sitting at home wondering to themselves, and this also creates anxiety. Does it mean because my manager hasn't heard from me that I am inactive? What about my self-worth? Am I being isolated because I'm just not participating in the workday the way I would when I am at the office, you know?
I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question, but I do want to qualify what is being said until now. I don't know if it'll be helpful to the audience, but I think it's very, very necessary, both in the context of UWC as well as generally. So when we talk about work and the changes we have to make, I think we must realize one of the changes that has occurred over the last few years is that everyone is expected to do more with fewer resources. And that fault line was there even before COVID. It is now magnified by COVID. And what we're saying is that everyone gets affected, but is particularly vulnerable in our institution, for example. So, for example, myself compared to some of our support and cleaning staff, I'm better resourced to be able to cope with that change compared to the other people. So when we talk about performance appraisals, the kind of managerial approach to what's happening at university, I think we must do both. We need the strategies which are being outlined about what is it that individuals need to do, but we need to change systems which are supportive and mindful of the fact that maybe what is being asked of people is not humanly possible. And that we cannot make these changes. We can't expect this change of people without offering the requisite support, financial, human, etc. And I think my problem with this, the kind of self-help industry which I'm in, is that it often shifts the burden of responsibility back to, back to the individual. And I think we need to do both. We need to change the systems as well as look at what is it that we as individuals can do. So
how do you? We've heard from the other speakers, Rashid. How and I want to come back to the core of our conversation today. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first in a series of webinars directed at UWC staff in terms of mental health and wellness, and awareness. So in terms of that self-awareness and the stresses and the symptoms, what should our staff be thinking about? There might be feelings of guilt as well, like, because you mentioned our cleaning staff coming back, and they may have the fear of being on campus and testing positive for COVID, while I'm sitting at home and I'm relatively safe at home. So what are some of those things that some of the pitfalls we need to look out for?
Yeah, so again, my view is different from some of my colleagues, and I don't know if it will be helpful to share, but I'm not sure a diagnosis is helpful. Like, it can be helpful because it can provide relief, right? But I think so if I'm diagnosed with depression, anxiety, it can be an immense relief that, other people are having this experience. But what does happen is people then can become their diagnosis. So they say, I'm depressive, I am an addict, and they don't look at the totality of the experience. And sometimes it can even become something that you can hide under. And I think I prefer the term human suffering or human distress. So it's saying that depending on our context, depending on our experience, the suffering can take many, many different forms: guilt, anxiety, bodily pains, and depending on our context, cultural, class, etc., we experience human suffering in very different ways. Yeah. And sometimes it's not helpful always to categorize. So the lesson for people is identify for yourself how you think your suffering manifests. And you'll be guided both by what's happening within your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, but also by people around you.
Yeah, I want to bring in Dr. Ramneek here. And I'm just cognizant of time as well. We want to leave some time and some substantial time for some takeaway points for our colleagues to take home and to think about. Dr. Ramneek, can you just talk about, you mentioned universities like the University of the Western Cape, which is a historically disadvantaged institution. And before we went to lockdown, we established that about 30% of our students are without data or devices or both. And we might find that many of our staff also have these limitations, or these resource constraints. So how do we approach this as a sector in terms of attempting to make all things equal in our higher education landscape?
It's a very difficult question, because the diversity in our country, and I think post-apartheid, what we have actually adopted in this country is two South Africa. We actually have two South Africa in the same South Africa. It's very difficult to neutralize in 25 years of democracy in a very quick time, or 26 years. It takes time. We have in the same institution of University of Western Cape, a student of a lecturer coming who's from a middle-class family, a student from a family which is from a business class and having some good money coming in the house, maybe from a rich class. But we also have student from a cave flat who's absolutely coming from a very disprivileged background, fighting all the odds to say he or she will try to make a career, whatever it is, the difficult circumstances, but the aim is to get a degree and a qualification. There are many good examples of UWC alumni that have taken very senior positions in this country that I'm aware of, who came from absolute disprivileged backgrounds and kind of made this a possibility of living. So it's all about this inequality that exists. And that's something I'm not going to shy away, or any government should be shying away, because it exists and it's practically real. And that also increases mental health in a much more significant way. The challenges and it's not that a student from a privileged background doesn't have mental health issues. It's got a different kind of mental health persona of issues coming from background that she's coming from, to a person who's coming from totally disprivileged background, has the basic necessities and the stress of still competing and graduating in time, because at the end his aim or main goal will be is, I get my qualification and find a decent job, and for which I can start an earning. And there and limitations towards getting that approach is a next subsequent set of mental health illnesses. And when we talk about staff, we always focus on academic staff because that's obviously our cream. That's where biggest emphasis of work is, because that's where the knowledge is generated and that's where economy of scale is grown. But the pillar of a university is held by our frontline staff, which are sometimes more vulnerable and predominantly kind of the resource that sometimes needs more emphasis, both in mental health or other epidemics, or both related to health or psychosocial well-being that surrounds them. And they come from the most disprivileged. And I am very much concerned about population that is cleaning, administrative staff, specifically in HR and others, staff that comes from totally better. They are also equally expected to perform. They are now struggling to say what is their role in the institution when the institution was on a lockdown. And the biggest aim is they're even uncertain about the future because they're not hearing from the line manager quite often the way they used to be on a daily basis working in a regular environment, and that their job profile required it. So I think when the university has to look at mental health, it has to look at students in both unequal proportions. It has to look at staff, again, in both unequal proportions, and come up with protocols or algorithms or guidelines that warrants a manager to understand what his staff is going to go through, a staff to realize what the pressure the manager is going to go through, so that there is a balance in that category of thinking. And most importantly is communication, so that the university from the first set can start communicating to its student and staff community in an absolute clarity perspective, so that the fear of unknown, which will exaggerate all our mental health problems, start coming down into much more linearity. We can only try so much, but what the environmental COVID-19 is going to affect them is going to make our challenges much more complicated as we proceed going forward, because there will be a family member who will be infected with COVID-19 and might need an hospital care, because that's the kind of infection we're dealing with. So the person has to deal with that. There may be friends and community members who she knows might die because of COVID-19 due to its high risk at an age group that they're all related to, and that's going to happen with our staff members. So there's going to be a lot of environmental pressure of COVID-19 that's going to equally influence the same kind of stuff. So it's a balance between every magnitude of work. So that's why I said a comprehensive mental health and substance abuse, including, and I think substance abuse should be spoken about because it has its correlation, not only with mental health, as we all know, but with COVID-19, primarily because sitting at home, you're ideal, you're doing nothing, you're stressed. It might exaggerate substance abuse. It will exaggerate gender-based violence. We've already seen domestic violence rise of growth. So all these familial, community, environmental factors are all going to come to this individual. And this individual has to grapple. And that's going to be the biggest challenge that the sector has to go through.
Thank you, Dr. Ramneek. I think I want to now move towards what are some of the practical steps that we can take. Firstly, to self-identify when we're feeling vulnerable and what we can do to keep our lids down so that we don't make ourselves prone to gender-based violence or resorting to substance abuse or being abusive or having a fallout with a colleague. You know, coming from a journalism background, the burden on my team in terms of communication is quite huge in terms of the campus community. And we often hear colleagues say, and staff say, that they're being bombarded with emails all the time. of information, and you mentioned that, Dr. Ramneek, the clear communication lines. So I fall into the category of, there's two types of journalists, three actually. The journalists who can count and those who can't count. So I'm one of those who can't count, clearly, from the three categories. But there's also two categories of people who manage the inboxes. So I'm an inbox zero type of person. I don't like leaving my laptop and seeing that I've got 4 or 5 emails waiting for me. You know, I'm just that kind of a zero inbox personality. There's another type that says zero inbox infinity, where inboxes pile up and the person is okay with it, you know? So on that note, I want to start with Colinda, and please talk us through, especially in the area of self-identifying, when you need to actually take time off for self-care. Self-care is a very important word. When do you need to be aware that, you know, things are not going according to plan in terms of your wellness? And if you can leave us with a few points.
Sure. So, Rashid, you mentioned something earlier, which I thought was very important, which is, you know, for one, not to identify with that label, because then you become that victim and it becomes all of who you are. So I think that that's incredibly important, that self-identification is really just about, well, this is the area of issue that I'm dealing with, whatever it may be. So sometimes we call it something clinical, like, you know, generalized anxiety or depression. But absolutely, we don't at any point want somebody to kind of, oh, well, that's me. You know, I've got this thing and now I'm done. So it's really just for ease of communication. And I think that's an incredibly important point to get across to people. So that's the first. And then I'm often reminded of a quote by Hippocrates, which I'm going to paraphrase here, which is that he was more interested in the person who had the disease than the disease that had the person. So I think that's the important thing, that there's a person who may or may not have a clinical issue going on. So one of the things, Gasant, that you mentioned made me think of compassion fatigue. So if we think all of us, you know, working with people, managing, being available to people, I think all of us are just out there trying to help as much as we can. So compassion fatigue is something we really need to be keeping in mind. And, you know, we've all heard this before. On the plane, you can't help, you can't give what you don't have. So I think that, you know, you've got to put your own mask on first and then help the person next to you. So we know about self-care, but we don't do it. So just a little pointer on compassion fatigue. It starts off with the physical fatigue, yes. And then it ends up with cynicism, where we just don't care. And what a lot of the studies are showing is that men in the medical professions especially go straight to the cynical, where women stop halfway with the self-doubt. Am I doing enough? Was that really helpful? So that's just a little tidbit on compassion fatigue. But we all know we need to have self-care. So the continuum I like to use is, here is self-neglect, give till you drop. And this side is self-obsessed, which is what I think the world is pretty much about, which is why we got here. And in the middle is self-care, which is look after yourself in order to be able to give to others. So that's just a little piece on self-care. And then for everybody who's listening, depression, anxiety, and burnout, this triad are actually happening to way more people than we'd thought before, even worse than those statistics I showed you earlier, I think the current numbers. So I'm just going to touch on the key features of each. Okay, so with depression, the two big features, and we're always looking for a cluster of symptoms. So this could be, just maybe listen for yourself or anybody else you know. If there's a cluster of symptoms, which is the big two are sleep and mood. So again, we've all had sad days, bad days, but sleep is the big one. You either have initial insomnia, you can't get to sleep, you're lying in bed thinking or just lying there, or terminal insomnia, which is you wake up in the early hours and you just can't get back to sleep. Some people wake frequently through the night, they drop and then they wake. And others are just sleeping constantly, 12 hours, and they're still exhausted. So sleep's the one biggie. And then, of course, the other one is mood. So typically your mood would either be just numb, just grey, like this grey sky, or otherwise it would be very teary. You know, you'd be quite emotional quickly. And sometimes people get agitated. And with that, just that mood, you just don't care, you know, what's the point? And it'll come out in your language. So those are the big two. And if you've got these with any three of the other ones on the list there, your motivation's disappeared, your libido's disappeared, your appetite is either very up or very down, you can't concentrate, your short-term memory's gone, your interest, all of that. So basically the color is leached out of your life and you just like this sort of, you know, beige or something. If you've got a cluster of all of these for 4 weeks, then you know you could have slid into a depression. Now, people often say to me, what's depression versus burnout? So burnout is all about the Sunday night and it's all about work. So Jessie, this is 2 slides ahead.
When you hear that carte blanche theme song, it's a trigger,
you see, you know.
What is work?
So on a Friday, you kind of, oh, it's Friday. On Saturday morning, before the birds are up, you're up. Oh, I've got a whole weekend. Sunday after lunch, you know, that thing. Now, of course, we can all have the Sunday blues, and that could mean many things. But when there's a consistent pattern, with this exhaustion, you just sleep and you don't feel better. You take leave and you're still finished. Constant fatigue, aches and pains all over the place. But the top 2 points there, the Sunday nights are the baddies, and anything to do with work drops your energy immediately. Anything else, you're good. That's the difference between burnout and depression. Depression, it's leached into your entire life. And then there's a 70% overlap between depression and generalized anxiety. So we used to call it free-floating anxiety, and that's pretty much how it is. It grabs onto things. So today it's on finance, tomorrow it's on health, later on there's a phase of COVID, then it's about something in the home, you know, so generalized floats around, and the key factor there is worry. So we're not talking normal worry, we all worry, but this is that worry, it's a vicious cycle, you can't stop it. People call you the worry wart. Oh, so-and-so is always worrying, if there's nothing to worry about, they'll worry. If that is consistently you, with some physiological symptoms, and I often use the word brace, you know, that you're always kind of bracing for the next thing that's going to happen. So the person's in yellow alert all the time. So with anxiety, with the generalized, it's all to do with that, where you constantly have these aches and pains, you're a bit agitated, you're a bit edgy, you've got stomach symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms, and you're always in that sort of yellow alert. So I learned to drive a manual car, of course not now, but you know, that riding the clutch thing, that's the yellow alert. You're just kind of bracing, where's the next threat going to come from? And look, right now, that's all of us, but when it's clinical, you just can't snap out of it, you can't. And so this is kind of the landscape of what anxiety, depression, and burnout look like. I've mentioned a few on there as well. And so all of us at the moment have got situational worry, definitely. Situational panic, situational OCD. But the people who have these as, you know, clinical disorders, and remembering mood disorders, be they bipolar, anxiety, depression, always have a genetic basis as well. So that is why, you know, chemical things actually help, or exercise, that sort of thing. So really, long story short, thank you for humoring me, everybody. This is one of my passions, to educate. If you suspect that there's something like this going on, if you suspect you've got like actual OCD, not just the normal washing we all have, there's something called the Y box. You can find it online. If you think you might have depression, there's the Beck Depression Inventory, or there's the Hamilton Depression Inventory. These things are all available online. Burnout, there's the Maslach Burnout Inventory. So there are many, many measures online. And I do put a word of caution with Dr. Google, I know, but it might just give you an indication that maybe you do need to book a consult at your clinic with your GP. I know SADAG has a helpline which is for the students at your university, but SADAG is a helpline for everybody. So we have resources. So if you think there's something going on, please reach out. Just rather have a conversation and discover, actually, no, it's just a phase. But if it isn't just a phase, you are going to need some assistance. Incredibly important.
And on screen at the moment, you can see that there's a Wellness at UWC program. If you are having these feelings, please make use of it. We're going to distribute it to everybody. again on one of those emails that all of us love receiving from the university. But HR will also make available the numbers for SADAG where Colinda works. They've got toll-free hotlines. That's correct, eh, Colinda? Where people
Yes.
can call in and they can speak to somebody about how they're feeling. And if they suspect whether they have one of these symptoms, they can actually be directed to. So we will make that available as well. Thank you very much, Colinda, for those takeaway points. I think it's very important to be aware of what it is, and often the therapy and speaking to somebody unearths the underlying issues that causes the trigger, causes you to feel this way or a certain way, you know. One of the antidotes is something that Shamiema specializes in, and that is emotional intelligence. How do you take whatever it is you're going through and you make it part of your day-to-day life in terms of finding the coping mechanisms or the tools to navigate through what you're feeling?
Sure. I can give you a quick 5-step process that has really become one of my daily practices. And the first one I spoke about before, which is really around self-awareness. So knowing myself and also knowing the people around me. So it's not just all about me, but it's about me and you, and we're in this together. So taking into account my personality versus your personality, and where do those personalities align, and where do those personalities get stuck with each other? What are the things that are going to be said or done that is going to create some friction or some resentment? And to be aware of that. So the first step is really around self-awareness. And the second piece is, Hassan, I think you spoke about this quite a bit, is knowing your triggers. No, you know, all of us, every single human being gets triggered. It's not because, oh, I've got a mental health issue now. I want to be clear about this. It's not about people with mental health issues. We all get triggered. We all get upset by certain things that are done or that are not done. And it is important for you to be very awake and aware to what are those things, so that when they come up and when you recognize that in yourself or in others, or if somebody says something, you can go, okay, that's my trigger. So now what can I do? Wake up, okay? Because if I ignore the trigger, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole and I'm going to end up with an outcome that I'm really not happy with. So it's important for you to go, right, that's mine, that's my particular trigger. And we all have different triggers. So, and once you know what your triggers are, is then to bring from your unconscious to from your unconscious to your conscious, what am I thinking about that particular person in the moment? Or what's the label that I'm giving them? You know, so an example of this is, give you an easy example. My husband said to me recently, "You were late to pick up our daughter." Okay. And in that moment, I was triggered. And so to be aware of my thinking. So in that moment, I labeled him as a bully, someone who doesn't care about me, someone who has his own interests before me. So just to be aware of, what am I thinking? How am I judging him in that moment? And also, what am I thinking about myself in the moment? It's like, yeah, I'm always late for her. I'm never going to be good enough. Like, you know, I'm just not a super mom. I'm never going to be that. So there's thinking that you have about that other person, and then there's also thinking that you have about yourself. If you are not aware of those thoughts in the moment, that conversation can go very sideways very quickly. and you will let your emotions speak and speak from, you know, letting your emotions lead you rather than being intelligent about how you drive that conversation into a way that works for both of you. So that's the second piece.
Shamiema, just one thing there is often if somebody's accusing you of always being late, it's a trigger for them as well, because they're projecting what they're feeling onto you, you know?
Yeah.
And so it kind of works both ways, I find.
Yeah. And often in a case like that, if somebody says, you're always whatever, late, or you're always
untidy,
or you never clean up, you know, whatever, is for you to then, you know, pause, take a breath, and kind of go, really, you know. And that's the partnership piece, is about, instead of biting back or fighting back or getting stressed up about it, is just say, well, is that really true? So it helps that other person kind of go, oh, well, maybe I am exaggerating a little bit, you know, maybe that's really just, I didn't really mean that. And that's the way that you can help simmer down something that could be very explosive. And you can do that quite quickly. And then the third piece is around shifting your attitude. So to shift your thinking from blame and shame into, okay, something said that I don't like, so I'm going to shift my attitude into, how can I leave this conversation in a way where we're both satisfied with what was said and done. And so part of it is me having to simmer down my emotions, take some breath, and really change my thinking into, he's not really trying to do what I'm thinking he's trying to do in that moment. For example, he's trying to blame and shame me. He's, you know, all of that, and to just shift that into an attitude that's positive rather than negative. And then the fourth thing I would say is that, especially in the beginning days, of practicing emotional intelligence, is I would say, practice it every day. You know, I say to, you know, people that I'm coaching, I say, set aside 30 minutes every day, in the morning or in the evening late, you know, as the last thing that you do. Record your triggers of the day. Record what you were thinking in that moment. Record what you did in that moment. Record your regrets. And then the last piece is around number 5, which is really about setting the intentions. It's that piece about, I wish I did it this way, or I wish I said it like that in the moment, is to then record the, okay, next time when it happens, what I'm going to say is this, and what I'm going to do is this. And if you practice that on a daily basis, I'm guaranteed your outcomes will shift radically.
It's a bit of visualizing as well.
Your relationships. What was that? Sorry.
It's a bit of visualizing as well.
Absolutely. The more, if you can't see it, if you can't see your new behavior, or you can't see an adjusted relationship in your mind's eye, you're probably not going to get there. So visualization is key, a big part of it.
Thank you so much, Shamiema. Rashid, we've heard some of these coping mechanisms, but also the understanding how to use emotional intelligence to self-manage. If you can leave us with a few things about your self-management as a person, you know, and what are some of the tips that you can give us as we navigate through these troubled waters at the moment?
Can I suggest that, given that Shamiema and Colinda have spoken so well about it, I speak more to the support part.
Absolutely.
Because I think that they've captured really well what are all the practical things we can do.
Sure.
For me, for mental well-being, I don't like the term mental health, we need both. We need all the self-management, but we also need support. And my area of interest is resilience. And resilience simply means when you're in a very difficult situation, how do you bounce back or overcome it? What they found in resilience is that it's not the innate capability. So it's not like Rashid is more resilient than Gasant. What it's saying is the social environment and specifically social support makes a huge difference to resilience, growth, healing. And so I want us to think about that. What is it that we can do, both in COVID, both at our institution, that we can support each other, both as colleagues, but also managers, support, finding ways of being more compassionate and caring and supportive of people who work under them. And if we can activate supports, both human social supports, but also both other structures, I think we can do a lot for people's well-being. Sometimes I think the self-regulation is not enough, and it must be complemented by. So they found, for example, with resilience research, even one supportive relationship makes a huge difference to people's outcomes. And I think that a lot of that gets neglected at the expense of, us focusing on the individuals rather than, what we can invest in terms of the environment that can kind of make people grow. And we can use this in our own lives as well. So if someone is going through a tough time, what can you do? How can you care? How can you lend a hand? And yes, professionals are important, but there's a lot that all of us can do every day in our lives. So for me, that's as important as the self-management. I think the self-management they spoke to really, I think, rather well.
Rashid, I think you touched on a very important point there about the duty of care. Yeah. So the University of the Western Cape is known as a place that prides itself in community engagement, social justice, and making sure that we produce graduates who have all the attributes to cope in the modern day of work, So I mean, it's part of our DNA. It's part of where we've come from, always selfless. So we've had moderate success in helping our students participate in learning and in blended learning and online learning by creating an appeal, for example. And I want to say to Dr. Ramneek that we actually coined the phrase "no student will be left behind," and it was nicked by the sector. So that's exactly where we come from, and I think it's important that we have that support structures. I think the worst thing for somebody who finds themselves in a difficult space is not knowing where to turn to next. Are my friends going to judge me? Is my spouse going to think I'm losing my marbles? And also what we haven't touched on in this conversation is, what kind of support can we give to a spouse or family member who's feeling particularly vulnerable, The question, for example, is, why are you feeling like this? Could be one of the most frustrating questions to be asked if you suffer from anxiety or depression. So I want to give Dr. Ramneek the opportunity to say a few final words, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. I think we've got about 7 minutes to go, if my clock is set correctly. Dr. Ramneek,
thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be brief and very quick. As a sector, when you have a country as big as ours and with very much and how diverse it is, and somebody sitting in Pretoria has to design a program on mental health for the sector. And I think what UWC is doing is excellent. In fact, this is what gives us the kind of satisfaction that each and every institution is prioritizing for its staff, its students, a wellness program, a psychosocial well-being program, educating young people, educating staff and talking to them about their challenges. What you've done through the experts that you have, psychologists, businesswomen, Professor Rashid, and the brilliant comments that have come across, and lots for me to even learn to. But from higher health perspective across the country, we are designing something called a second curriculum on mental health. We've done the second curriculums on HIV in the past. We considered it's an epidemic that affected young lives in South Africa. It still does. About 8.1 million South Africans live with this epidemic. It worked there. as a methodology. We designed a second curriculum for sexual reproductive health, teenage pregnancies, unplanned pregnancies being a massive challenge. We designed something for gender-based violence. We designed something for substance and alcohol abuse. Now, a second curriculum is peer-to-peer led, very resonating, because the best way to transform an education to another is through a second curriculum. Now, when you go to schools, you have your children go through an extramural class. An extramural class is a class that is not compulsory for exams, but it gives you an extra benefit of a qualification or understanding of your interest. And we run a second curriculum called on mental health. It's been designed with the help of World Health Organization in higher health. Last year, we had about 1 million young South Africans that went through our education system of second curriculum. It's a very powerful curriculum, runs every time after 12 o'clock across all our campus sites, whether you are in Zalicha or in UWC, irrelevant, the same curriculum applies. It talks about basic understanding of mental health. And not only it applicable to only to students, it also goes for staff. And peer-to-peer also helps in the staff network programs. So health promotion, education through a proper formalized second curriculum, and then every student and staff who goes through the second curriculum, which is a formal recorded curriculum, then has to do a mental health risk assessment. In early stages, just imagine these 17 years old, 18 years old, these 15 years old in our TVET colleges. Our TVETs take students from 15 years onwards, grade 8 onwards. Young lives learning about mental health and doing their own self-risk assessment through a questionnaire-based WHO screening. Identifies them quickly. Are they on high risk to some kind of mental illness, whether it's depression, anxiety, or anything that relates to psychosocial well-being. And that is what the WHO questionnaire helps you identify. Now we are starting with the second tier, which UWC has already started up, is with SADAG having a 24-hour helpline. So is now higher health doing for everyone, not just for UWC, whether a TVET college in a township or a rural area in Umlazi or in Port Shepstone, irrelevant wherever, or in Ladysmith, everybody gets the same opportunity for a 24-hour helpline, takes them through full step of guidance. And now we are hiring about 10 to 15 psychologists per region. Per district, we're trying to get it to district level so that the language barrier can be taken away. And students from their secondary system. So primary is education and screening. Secondary is 24-hour helpline and counseling support. And the tertiary is clinical psychologist that can then give further intervention through proper CBTs and other areas that needs a proper follow-up. And then all our health systems are linked and partnered with Department of Health. Yes, we do have, I cannot say it runs across every province in a similar way, but Department of Health is committed that we are going to connect all the mental health facilities with our clinical psychologists so that there's a proper referral system into the next layer, which is the last tertiary level, which is admissions and proper care. And that also follows in the substance abuse programming. I'm part of the Minister Zwelin Kize's mental health task team, and we are connecting the dots right there in order for us to make sure that it works. We are a public country, we got inequalities, might not work everywhere, but we have to start so that mental health becomes a priority. It's the talk of the town, it's the talk of a campus, and it is prioritized, and stigma is dissolved through education and through proper communication and promotion so that people can be aware and can respond through peer-to-peer programs. Thanks for, I took a little longer, but thanks.
No, Dr. Ramneek, I'm always, when an academic says, I'm going to be short, I'm always wary of that, but I'm only joking. I think it's very important what you've raised there. And we're going to bug you for those resources and for those numbers and contact details for all the resources that you're talking about, so that our community can reach out, And I think the way higher health has managed the COVID-19 and the response has been very admirable, from looking at everything across the board, you know, and having a sectoral response to how we deal with issues. On that note, I want to say that this was my first hosting of a webinar. I didn't have a good night's sleep because I was a little bit nervous, but quite excited to hear from colleagues. And I want to thank, starting from Dr. Colinda Linde from SADAG. You'll see her numbers were on the screen. Can we keep that screen up, Jessie, for a few more seconds? Ms. Shamiema McLeod, who spoke about the fascinating topic of emotional intelligence. There's a school of thought that says EQ is actually more valuable than IQ. So I will definitely reach out to her in future, because it's something that I'm really interested in. Dr. Ramneek, thank you so much for taking time out in your busy schedule. You've got an entire country of higher health education issues to be concerned about. And thank you for giving UWC and our staff the time. And then finally, our very own Prof. Rashid Ahmed, who in my WhatsApp group, with all the WhatsApp groups that I'm linked to at the in the university community, they've got a new fan base of colleagues who have been wondering where you've been all this time, you know? and they love what you're saying. That we are a caring community, and we need to remember that. You know, we've got a duty of self-care, and we need to use that as our tool, as our weapon to assist others and to bring everybody along on the journey. I want to thank everybody for tuning in as well. This will be made available to everybody. You will get an email, one of those emails, and it will have a message from HR as well, a video message. So thank you so much for joining us, and take care and have a good weekend. It's cold, it's wet outside, stay off the roads and keep warm.
Thank you so much, Gasant, for hosting. It was well done. You wouldn't say it was your first time ever.
And that was my cat, by the way, who interrupted me for a brief second.